or an angel or somebody seems to ask a person a question they know the answer to, like, where is Sarah your wife, to Abraham, or God saying to Cain, where's your brother? And each time, usually Rashi says, to enter into conversation. Right? That was the question you're asking. And the third is more broadly on science and Torah and how they reconcile. So let's take the second one first, because I think it's important to both the others. Interestingly enough, though it may not sound it. What does it mean that God wants to enter into a conversation? Right? Why does he go to Adam after the sin and say, where are you? Why does he go to Cain after he's killed his brother, Abel, and say, where's your brother? Why does the angel say to Avram, to Abram, where's your wife? Right? In each case, knowing the answer. Right? And the answer seems to be that multiple. The simple level is, at least in the first two cases, it was giving them an opportunity to apologize. Right? In the first two cases, Adam could have said, I'm so sorry I've sinned. Cain could have said, I'm so sorry I've killed him. And in the case of Abram, also is brought down, and Rashi kind of brings this, is that it was to get him to recognize just how modest Sarah is. But the common denominator in all of them is this, is that entering a conversation with God is not straightforward. Coming face to face with reality when we've been living in some kind of an illusion is not a straightforward thing to do. In each case, the conversation, the revelation that's happening with God, with an angel, with something, is going to create a change. Okay, it's going to create a change. And it needs the person to be prepared for that change. Sometimes the person's going to one option would be, I should say, the person could apologize and then they're ready for one interaction with God. In another case, the person refuses to apologize and there's now a punishment going to enter the world. In the case of Abram and Sarah, what's going to happen is that the news of them having a child is going to enter the world. In each case, there's a entering into a conversation that they're not quite yet ready to have. Okay, they're entering into a revelation with God they're not quite yet ready to have. And we do this with humans, by the way. If we're about to have a difficult conversation, we sometimes start on a more lighter note and then get a bit more into it. What we're doing is we're kind of building a relationship or building a rapport that is preparing the ground for the thing that we want to say. Or if we want to teach somebody something, we often start with lighter material. Do you get this piece of information? Oh yes, I can see this. Right, then let me give you this. So entering in words is not just a polite mode of conversation, it's actually preparing the grounds for a stage-by-stage entry into. First of all, I've got to be in contact with God. God actually cares about what I say or do. That's the first thing that happens in each case. My life matters to God. The choices I'm about to make or did actually matter. That's the first likonisimo devarim, is entering into speech. Then comes the topic matter. This topic itself is important. Abel is important to me, says God. Right? Where you are in the world is important, God says to Adam. That's very important. Sarah is important to God. Right? These things are, because remember, until that point, Abraham's been promised children, but Sarah's been out of the picture. She's important. What's important about her? The fact she's modest. The fact she's preparing for the guests, but not in the limelight. All these things start to be very important. And they prepare the consciousness for what's coming next. She's going to have a child. You're now in a state of heightened appreciation of her. Now you can understand that through her you will have all the promises that God delivered, etc. So that's what's going on. Now, why is that important to us? Because, you see, God has not revealed the world to us in one go. On many levels, the whole of history is God's eventually going to reveal everything right along the way. But that means that story of life is a constant revelation. The final chapter of history is going to be the great revelation of God, but we're not always ready for it. So there's entering into conversation, and that comes through our studying of Torah. The greatest way to for us to enter the conversation with God is studying God's word. God is talking to us. And actually God uses two languages to talk to us. Language number one is his Torah. He's revealed himself. He's literally revealed his word. He's revealed his will. This is what I would like you to do, at least as a Jewish people. Also for non-Jewish people, there's stuff in there. But this is what I want you to see happen in the world. That is the word of God. Creation is the word of God. Law, Torah is the word of God. And the more we study that word, the more we're listening to God. The more God's entering into conversation with us. So now we have a conversation with God. God is talking, we have to listen. How do we listen? Let's analyze the text. What words did he say? What could they mean? Do they contradict something he said somewhere else? What does God want in this situation? He didn't say it black and white in the Torah, but he said this and he said that. And therefore these rabbis saw this should be how these say this. And now we're starting to enter and become part of the conversation. That's language number one of entering the conversation. Right? Torah's conversations are before God's revealed his word. Now they're revealed. The conversation changes. Number two, and this the Rambam says in a few places, in slightly different ways, is the natural world. Science is God talking. Why? Because what's the very first, where's the very first speech of God in the Torah?
Let there be light.
Yeah, even before he says, be fruitful and multiply, let there be light. The whole creation chapter is God speaking. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let there be a firmament. It's interesting. The most frequent verb in the creation chapter is not making, creating, or forming. It's speaking. God said, Vayomer Elokim, God said there should be a firmament. God said the water should recede and land should be revealed. God said there should be animals, plants, everything. It's all God speaking. And that means that creation is actually God talking to us as well. So we have, if you like, what you should do with creation, the law, what you're meant to do, that's God speaking through Torah. And we have creation itself, that's God speaking through science. Now, science is the tool we use to understand it. And of course, somebody who uses that language to deny God can try to do so. Somebody who uses that language to affirm God can do so. But somebody who uses the language to get closer to God, that's really what you're meant to do with it. According to the Rambam, the best pathway to get close to God is start from the outer world, look at God's actions and creations, go inwards, what are the things that drive, and keep going up that ladder forever. So, now that leads us to a very important principle, that in principle then science and Torah shouldn't really contradict each other. And the Rambam actually says, in the what we call in English the Guide for the Perplexed, Hebrew it's called Moreh Nevuchim, but it actually wasn't written in Hebrew, it was written in Arabic. But if I say in Arabic is the Dalalat al-Ha'irin, that's not likely to mean anything. So we'll use the Guide for the Perplexed. In the guide, in one of the introductions, there's a bunch of introductions, he does say that, and he says it elsewhere as well, that if you think there's a contradiction between our best understanding of the way the world runs naturally and the Torah, then you either haven't understood the natural world, or you haven't understood the Torah, or you haven't understood both. Okay? That's the fundamental principle in answer to your question. God speaks in different voices. In each case, there is the speech of God, and then there's our understanding of it, which develops and develops and develops, and brings out more and more and more. And in cases where there seem to be contradictions, the fundamental principle is there aren't contradictions. There may be contradictions in our current understanding, because the current understanding is incomplete. Now, in the case of science and Torah, so I'll give some very brief points, okay? I have other talks where I've gone in greater length, so I don't know which program, because on Foundations I spoke about it last week.
Yeah, I was in that a little bit.
Okay, so I'll give a very brief. Very, very roughly, there are different ways that one can try and reconcile science and Torah, okay? There are different approaches, and they range. I don't know, maybe we'll just ask the audience here, like, what you guys have heard about any ways that we could reconcile things like the age of the universe in Torah and science and so on. What have people here heard?
Evolution.
What's that?
Evolution.
Now, how reconciling is how they're not contradictory. That's yeah.
Days are longer than days, I've heard. Like meaning the 7 days.
Could be longer than they could be very maybe millions of years. Okay, yeah. What else have people heard? So I'll tell you very roughly 4 different approaches that can be taken. The first is a very simple approach. You'll hear this quite a lot in the Orthodox Jewish world in some sections of it. Right, and a lot of people won't like it, but this is approach number one. Approach number one is just to say, okay, so let's take this issue. Science claims the universe is 13.8 billion years old. It claims planet Earth is several billion years old. It claims life forms on Earth are billions of years old. Humans are, depending on what you call a human, a modern human, anywhere between 70,000 to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years old, etc. So how do you deal with all of this? And the Torah says the world is 5,786 years old, right? So that's quite different. Slight difference. So the basic approach, number one, is to say, well, actually, science doesn't really tell you. If nobody's observed, no one's gone back in a time machine and gone and seen a world that far back. What it's doing is building the mathematical model based on the data we have in front of us, and it's correct. But it doesn't mean the world really is that old. God could have made a world 6,000 years ago with a story, just like we have virtual worlds all the time and games people play, and that world has a backstory, and you can dig in that world and find its backstory. It's a non-falsifiable argument. A lot of people find it theologically dissatisfying because why would God build a world with such a long, complicated backstory that never happened? Okay, it's an open, but it's a possibility. That's one you'll hear some people say. A second approach, which you'll hear less people say, but I think has more grounding in Jewish sources, second, third, and fourth approach actually, all play on the fact that the creation chapter does not appear in our calendar. When's the new Jewish year begin? Rosh Hashanah. What does Rosh Hashanah commemorate? What was the first ever Rosh Hashanah?
Creation of Adam?
Yeah, it's not the creation of the world. It's creation of man. It's right at the end of the 7 days of creation. Either the beginning of the sixth day, end of the sixth day. But it doesn't commemorate the days of creation. And you have different midrashim, different ancient rabbinic texts that say lines that are enigmatic, that these contain tkufas, like ages of the world, or sodas, secrets of the world. So people want to draw on this and say, okay, so maybe these days of creation are different. Now, so the second approach is going to be like this, and if people are going to listen to this, you have to listen very carefully, because otherwise you get the wrong impression, okay? So you can either switch off or switch on, but okay. Let's imagine the following scenario. You ready for this? Imagine in this room was a bunch of, and it's going to, I'm sure, happen very soon in the world, a bunch of computer programmers, AI programmers, whatever it may be, and physicists, okay? And you sit in a room together and you decide you would like to build a model of a universe. Build your own simulated universe. Maybe a universe that begins very similar to ours, maybe from some kind of Big Bang or heptachronic universe, or however our best theory of the beginning is. And you run it on the first day. This universe runs from a Big Bang. It runs across what will be billions of years, and it gets there. But the problem is, the way you ran that universe, which would probably happen to most universes that just explode, either it just explodes outwards and nothing forms anywhere, or enough gravity to hold it, but then it collapses back in. So you twiddle with the universe. You play a few little things with its constants, and the next day you run the same thing. And this time a remarkable thing happens. There's a cancellation of matter and antimatter, but the matter exceeds the antimatter, and things start to cluster all over the universe into things like stars. And amazingly enough, you've got a universe that's very much like ours. It's got stars, but it doesn't have planets. Okay, it doesn't matter. You change one or two more constants. The next day, you're starting to get these stars explode and various things are happening, and planets are starting to form. Tiny tweaks, don't need to do a lot at all. You've got these amazing random chaotic processes with a few little key constants, and you're now starting to get planets that have the conditions for life. Amazing. And then a few more tweaks and you're starting to get life forms. And after a few days of playing with this universe, amazingly enough, a week later, you have, on one planet at least, intelligent life. So intelligent, it can form languages. Maybe they even have people who speak English. If not, a language that we could interact with. Maybe they're like humans, or maybe they're not. And now comes the time, the moment, after a week of building this amazing universe, it's time to send one of you inside. And you pull in this 3D sensory suit, and boom, you're inside this universe. And you start walking around, interacting with these beings. And you introduce yourself. And you say, my name is, what's your name? Yeah. Mordi. And you are 18, 17? 17 years old. I'm Mordi, and you start talking, 17 years old, I'm from a place called Manchester, right? And they start responding back, yeah, I'm whatever they are. I'm also 17 years old, and I'm from a place called whatever. And you pause them and say, what? You just said you're 17 years old. You mean years like, whatever. And they're like, yeah. And you're like, no, you're not. You're not 17 years old. You didn't exist last week. And they say, what do you mean I didn't exist last week? I'll tell you what, here, let me pull out my phone or whatever. Here's where I was last week. Not only did I exist last week, I existed 17 years ago. Not only did my parents are here. My grandparents. Not only that, I can tell you the story of my universe. I can tell you my great ancestry, and I can tell you millions of years of history. I can tell you billions of years of history. And you go, what are you, crazy? You're not even a week old. Who's right? You or them?
Both right.
You're both right. You're talking from the framework of the perspective from which this thing was created, and they're talking from the framework of inside this thing. Now, once you're inside it, you'll start your calendar, and 5,786 years old, you'll talk about, right? And if somebody was writing, and if you were forming the laws and the religious texts, and your guys in the lab are going to give them a law at some, then what's relevant is the days of creation, and then the point that you enter, and so on. But now the scientists inside there will look back and go, oh, it's billions of years. And you're both right. You're just talking about very, very different things. You see the analogy to the Torah? The Torah is describing, let's say, the world of the angels, or somewhere where the world you might call Kabbalistically Bria, Yetzirah, some world from which our world is generated. It describes the days of creation. It describes man in the Garden of Eden. It describes man's soul or mankind leaving that state of the Garden of Eden, entering into our consciousness. The soul of Adam basically enters into the Homo sapien. And the key event there is 5, 7, 6, 8 years ago, and that's what we then count. So they're not describing the same thing at all. That's the second approach. They're both true. They're not in contradiction. Our calendar deals with the relevant issues from there. The days of creation are up there. Scientists looking inside the universe, trying to figure out backwards. They're just not discussing the same subject matter. Yeah.
Simply, if you look at the Torah without science,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's just 1 day, 2 days, and then it's the same day.
Yeah, according to this, they can absolutely be days.
See, why can't I not say that the science may be flawed,
What do you mean?
as in their science is based on, I'm saying, axioms. To an extent.
That's a separate approach. You could try to attack science itself. There are people who do that and say science itself is wrong or it's uncertain. There are people who don't do that. It's not an easy thing to do because similar axiomatic assumptions got us smartphones and are getting us AI. That's the problem. It's not like there's a subject called cosmology over there, draw a wall over there, and there's modern technology over here. They're pretty much using the same system. So it would be very hard to pinpoint what you'd expect science to get wrong. There are people who do that. There are people who either say the Torah is wrong, science is right, or science is wrong and the Torah is right. You could do either. I'm talking about the question that came up here is, can you work the two together? And Rambam seems to suggest, Maimonides seems to suggest you generally should, meaning if you found the contradiction, you've misunderstood science or misunderstood Torah. Yeah.
It's not me doing this. It's according to Rambam. If you understand science and you understand the Torah, and
Yeah.
they work together, then well, Shalom Israel, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if
No, you may have,
if I'm
yeah,
trusting the science of others,
yeah.
there's no reason you can say that's contradicting the Torah.
Well, the Rambam does trust the science of others. Ironically enough, the science he trusted of others turned out to be wrong or incomplete, right? But he was, and so the answer the Rambam would give to this is the science of his time was wrong to some of the things. Some things he resolves are actually still relevant today. Some of them you don't even need to anymore. And you could say that's an important lesson. One very important lesson in humility is science is going to be so different in 100 years to today. Maybe there may be even better answers. Maybe the universe can only exist when there's consciousness. There may be all sorts of things we might get to. What I'm saying is, even given what we have now, there's no real reason to say there's a contradiction, because apart from anything else, the Torah is not really describing, the Torah is not, at least on the second approach, the Torah is not giving us a framework that we could use to calculate time going backwards. It's doing something else. 5, 7, 6, 8 years since the soul of Adam hits us, and the days of creation are describing a higher world. There are sources that say this or indicate this long before modern science, mostly in the Kabbalistic world, right, but nothing to do with modern science. This isn't just like an ad hoc apology to modern science. This seems to be an authentic way to read Torah, under which you would not predict that they would say the same thing. Yeah?
Well, how do we know, and this might be too long of an answer for now, but how do we know that, like, the being that created this universe, is involved, he didn't just, create it, right? Like,
And let it disappear. I'm not going to give a long answer now, but it's worthy of a long answer. But because it's an important question, I'll give a short answer. Then I want to get back to, here's what I want to do for the rest of our 17 minutes. Okay, 2 more approaches, maybe 1 more approach, maybe 1 or 2 more approaches to the science and Torah question. Then Moshe is right. Moshe's question about the bris milah, about circumcision and science and law. Let me give you, hopefully, a 1-minute answer that I hope will give you something that will help make it better. The question that just popped up over here is, how do we know if God, even if we have proof God made a world or believe God made a world, they didn't just abandon the world? It's a different question than anything we're dealing with. Very, very roughly, we do this all the time, right? We made this table, book, smartphone. And we walk away. The creator of these things walked away from them and never has to be there. So maybe God did that with the universe. Except, did humans really create this table? Only partly, not really, right? Why not? Because it's made out of wood. We didn't create the wood. It's made in space. We didn't create the space. It's made in time. We didn't create the time. It's made of metal. We didn't create the metal. We carved a few things, moved things around in laws of physics that already existed, wood that already existed, metal already existed. We simply shuffled some things around and it will stay by itself for a few decades or whatever, right? If you create, in other words, none of these things depended on us. That's why they don't depend on us now. But if you created something from nothing and it has nowhere else to come from except for you, then if you stop creating it, it won't exist. I'll give you an example. The nearest thing we can create something from nothing. Do you know what it is? We physically can't create anything from nothing.
Thoughts.
The closest is our thoughts. Nachmanides, the Rambam, says in creation, really it's God thinking the world into existence. If you close your eyes right now and dream up a world, you can have an alien world, populate it with whatever you want, purple beings that are like blobs, do whatever you want. You're not even the absolute creator. The truth is you didn't even really create that from nothing. Because your brain exists without you, you've got memories that you're putting together, you've got neurons firing, but it's about as close as we can get to creating something from nothing. And even that is already close enough that the moment you stop thinking about it, what happens? It's like it never existed. Do you see? Because it's already got enough dependency on you that it's crossed a point where it doesn't exist anywhere outside of you. If this world is God's thoughts, probably even more. That's the closest metaphor we can get. It's even more dependent on God and not independent than our thoughts are on us. If God stops thinking about it, it doesn't exist. Okay, so getting back to science and Torah. So we approach number one. Yeah, you could say science is wrong, you could say Torah is wrong, right? For those who would like to see the two work together, either you could say God's made the universe look older than it is, or you could say, no, the days of creation are discussing the laboratory, if you like, from which the world is created. Then we're inside the world. Then we count 5, 7, 6, 8 years, but inside, looking backwards, the correct count is much older. The third approach, and fourth, are people who you might call reconciliationists. They want to say they're both true physically, that the days of creation are describing the physical universe. This you hear a little bit from Orthodox Jewish scientists, and two very prominent ones who wrote on this subject. One's called Natan Aviezer and one's called Gerald Schroeder. Natan Aviezer was actually a professor of physics at Leeds University at one point, and Bar Ilan University in Israel. Okay, Leeds is just for the English amongst us; they'll know where that is. But and he wrote a bunch of books quite a few years ago. One's called Fossils and Faith. One's called In the Beginning. ... Some of the science is slightly out of date 20 years later. But most of the points are still very relevant. And his argument is that the days of creation, he starts like this, the days of creation look like they're in the same order that the scientific story of the universe looks. Because what's the first thing that happens in creation? What's the first thing God creates? He said, let there be light. The separation of light from darkness. Now, one of the first key events in the universe, in modern physics, in modern cosmology, we call the decoupling of light. Right? Then in creation you start to get something appearing on earth, you start to get the receding of water, almost immediately you get life starts forming, plant life and life forms in the water, and then beings start flying like insects, and then eventually you get land animals, and eventually you get humans, exactly the order of Genesis chapter 1. Now, if the Torah was written by humans, they would not have expected to get the order right, but the Torah gets the order exactly right, with one major exception. What's the major problem in the order of the Genesis chapter? Is the sun, moon, and stars only appear on the fourth day of creation. It sounds like they're created on the fourth day. Now, obviously, to have an earth, according to modern science, you have to first have the sun, so it seems wrong. Except, as Aviezer and Schroeder both point out, we have an oral tradition. And the oral tradition, ideas were recorded thousands of years ago. And in the Talmud in Chagiga, it explains, and Rashi brings it on the Torah, the classical Jewish sources, long before modern science, that they were all created on the first day. It's just they weren't revealed till the fourth day. So I don't remember, Aviezer says it, Schroeder points out that the way the atmosphere would have been in the very beginning, till there was enough plant life to have enough photosynthesis to change the atmosphere, you would not have been able to see the sun and moon. You would have known as light and dark, you wouldn't have had sun and moon. So now, and only when the plants are there, day 3 of creation, does the sun and moon become visible on the fourth day. And so it's exactly right. The order's perfect. So Aviezer says we've got an order that's perfect. The problem is time. Well, let's examine the Torah story of time. What is the Hebrew word for a day? yom. And what does yom mean? Well, yom, day is the most frequent meaning, but it means other things. For example, its plural form yamim means days, also means years. It even can mean a jubilee cycle, and it can even mean 1,000 years. We say in the book of Psalms in Tehillim, Ki elef shonim beinecha ki yom esmol, 1,000 years is like a day, your yesterday. So it means lots of units of time. It just means units of time. Its most common usage, if you just see it without any reason to think otherwise, the most common cycle of time is a day, and the most common usage of the word in Torah is a day. So that's the natural thing to say, but actually it just means a unit of time. And how long that time is could be any amount. So until you got modern science, you have no reason to not think it's a day, but once you have it, you could say it's 7 cycles of time. The Torah doesn't need to tell us how long it is, because the Torah is not a science book. It's there to teach us moral, religious lessons. So it's important to know this, but exact length of time you can wait for science for. And he goes into much more detail on all of this. So that's a third approach. I'm just giving you a very brief. So approach number 1, God can make the universe look older than it is. Approach number 2, the days of creation are not in space and time. They're the same with the Garden of Eden. It's only when we leave Garden of Eden we enter into space-time as we know it. Approach number 3 is the word yom does not need to mean 24 hours. Approach number 4 says the word yom can even mean 24 hours. I'm not going to have time to go into it in length, but very roughly, Gerald Schroeder points out 2 things. He shows you from textual commentaries that the Torah is talking from the beginning of the universe looking forward. Okay, where camera is right at the beginning. That's why when the first day of creation comes, we don't even call it a first day. When did the First World War get called the First World War? Only after the Second World War, right? It was the only World War until then. So it was one. There was one World War. So similar with creation, we call it day 1. We don't call it the first. And already from classical commentators like Ibn Ezra and Rambam discuss this, that means kind of got a camera at the beginning looking forward, right? And now modern science will have a camera here looking backwards. Why would that be relevant? So Schroeder points out that time does not flow equally at every point in the universe. Okay, that we know through Einstein. How old the universe is on planet Earth, we'd say it's 13.8 billion years old. And another part of the universe is 500 billion years old. Somewhere else in the universe, it's 20 minutes old. There's no one amount of time. Are you familiar with this idea? Time doesn't flow the same everywhere? You look very confused by it. Basically, one of Einstein's discoveries, if you would have a conversation with somebody in another part of the universe, if one of you would go in a spaceship right now where the gravity or the acceleration is radically different to ours on Earth, if we were having a conversation with you, and we said, hello, how are you? And you said, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? It would look to us, like if you're on the screen, like you're in real slow motion. You know, like the broken machine, or you're playing it very slowly, everything goes very deep. And so instead of going, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? It would be like, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? It'd be like, oh no, are you okay up there? And they'd be like, yes, I'm fine. And then you'd watch their heart beating, and it'd be like really slow. Doo-doom, doo-doo. They're breathing, like in slow motion. The watch is ticking, tick, 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 right? Everything's slow. Now, if you're in their spaceship right now, looking down on us, everything looks normal. Watches are ticking normally, you're breathing normally, heart's normal, you're speaking normally. We have gone into high speed. Like when you press the high speed, instead of saying, how are you, it would look up there like, hello, how are you? Right, that kind of thing. And when you'd look at our watch, we're going tick, 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 our heartbeat was do, 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 do. We would clock a minute, and we'd say, only half a minute of your time's passed. They would clock a minute, and they'd say 2 minutes of our time's passed. Who's right? Are we normal and they're in slow speed? They're normal and we're in high speed? Yeah.
We're talking about the same planet, though.
No. Anywhere, somewhere, usually it'll be...
Here we're talking about the same planet. No,
Oh, good. So you're right. So time's different all over the universe. You'd say, well, okay, that's very interesting, but surely we only care about this planet, right? So what Schroeder argues is, no, if you're looking for the beginning of the universe before this planet exists, your most important thing is what's called the cosmic clock. Some scientists refer to the microwave background radiation of the universe as its cosmic clock, the universal clock. And what Schroeder argues, and I'm not going to go through the argument, the maths of it here, he argues that scientifically, the cosmic time frame of the universe, like if you're at the beginning of the universe looking forward, what you see today in the background universe looking backwards, okay, and if you're at the universe looking forward, it will be distorted by a factor of a million times. Partly because the universe is a million times hotter than it is now, when matter first formed. And the result would be that if you look at the beginning and see something 1 day away or 1 year away, when you look backwards, it would look like a million days or a million years. And he says, so if you looked at the beginning of the universe and you said, let's say it took 5 days, an event 5 days into the future, right, the creation of man, 5 and a bit days, mathematically, if you multiply that by a million times, you don't need to do the calculation, you can do it afterwards, and you look backwards, you see 14 billion years. So it's exactly the same time from 2 different angles. So that's his answer to this problem. So let's just recap very quickly. You have at least 4 basic, you have several approaches. Anything from God could make a world look older than it is, to the days of creation are not really inside time, to maybe they really are the same thing, but the word day it's not, in Hebrew is not a day, it's any unit of time, to it could even be a day, but just from 2 different angles. There's different approaches. We don't have a tradition on this, because the problem modern science and reconciling with Torah is less than 200 years old. So we can't go back to our classical sources and say exactly which one of these or 2 of these are correct. It could be more than one of them is, right? But the main point is that there's enough ways to deal with it, or enough ways they could both be true without stretching the meaning of one or the other too far, that we can believe both, and we can even believe that we haven't yet figured it all fully out. There's a number of ways that are available, and there could be more still to come. Okay, but there's no reason to deny either. They don't have to be a contradiction. Okay, now let me get to what happens if science seems to undermine something that's important to Jewish law. So let's take the case of the lice that happened on Shabbos first. So not too long, decades ago already, we began to realize that all animals, theories of spontaneous generation are not true. Animals don't come out of the mud or dung by itself. They come from eggs, which are laid by other animals. And therefore, when we have a law saying that a certain animal, killing it on Shabbat is not biblically prohibited, that's wrong. So there was one very important source that in fact said that's true. A source called the Pachad Yitzchak, there's a more recent work called that same name, this was older, said that's true. The Talmud tells us the law, and the law is that any animal born from another animal is prohibited biblically to kill it on Shabbat. And it also gave us information that was available in their time, and the science of their time told them this animal's not like that, and therefore they did the best they could do, and God won't punish anybody for it because that was the information available. But now that we know better, we should take the same law but the different science. Rav Dessler has an essay where he says that's not correct. He says, in fact, what's more likely to be the case is that halacha law only deliberately applies at the level of the human eye. There are many examples in Jewish law. For example, do you have a bug? You're not allowed to eat a bug. What level of bug do you have to not? Only as something's available to the human eye. If you look on a microscope and see a microbe, or even just non-microbe, but just like insects that you can't see to the naked human eye, you don't need to worry about them. You can't have a black dot on an etrog on sukkahs, but if you can't see it in ordinary human... So halacha applies at the level of the ordinary human eye. If at the level of the ordinary human eye this thing is not born, meaning you can't see the thing it emerges from, then that would not be biblically prohibited to kill on Shabbat. So those are the 2 approaches. Now let's apply it to your example. Your example is even stronger than that, because some would argue that if a person... So bloodletting on a circumcision... Some would say is actually unhealthy. So the very halachic reason would work against doing it. So I think the mainstream approach nowadays, now it goes always down to the following. Sometimes the rabbis legislate a law, and they give you some of their reasoning behind it, but the reasoning doesn't define the law. Let's take this to a modern legal example, lahavdil in another legal system. If laws passed by the British Parliament or the American Congress, and you go into the deliberations and you see the motive was so-and-so at a particular congressional seat or particular parliamentary seat, and their constituents cared a lot about it, and now their constituents no longer care, that has no bearing on the law. It's irrelevant. The law is the law. It doesn't matter what reason, the motive the person had. On the other hand, you may have a law that's phrased as explicitly linked to the danger caused by so-and-so. When that danger is not there, it could be the law doesn't apply. Halacha, this is how it works. There are laws that are given explicitly, written into the law, if you like, is the reason, and therefore if the reason doesn't apply, the law doesn't apply. And there are other laws where no, it's nice to know the reasoning, but the law is the law until it's repealed. Okay? So a lot of this goes into this type of area. I think the Rabbinical Council of America and many of the great Gedolim like Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky said you should not do nowadays a any contact between the body and the circumcision to draw blood. But to fulfill the Talmudic thing, you could use a pipette. You could take something where there's no contact, and you do it enough that whatever happens, you'll have fulfilled the biblical obligation. You know, if your family were to have a strong whatever, some traditions, you have to check with your local rabbi when it comes to it. So there it seems that they can be worked, you can fulfill the Talmudic law without worrying about the potential health risk. But other examples come up like cholov stam, like whether you can have milk that's not supervised. So there one of the big debates is, it sounds from the Talmud like if like the whole reason for the law is our suspicion that they'll mix non-kosher products in, to the point where the Talmud says if they think you're looking every so often, that's enough. So on that basis, more than a number of rabbis down the ages wanted to permit it, and the most famous in the modern world was Moshe Feinstein went so far as to say once you got legislation that fulfills all that criteria, and others said no. Nowadays, the kosher fully supervised milk is very easily available. It's more or less become a non-issue. But when people live in isolated communities, it's hard to get hold of kosher milk, these things become more liable issues. So the basic answer will vary case to case. In the particular case you gave, it seems as a way to not have to worry about it too much. In the case of the Shabbat laws, you got two approaches, right? But broadly speaking, the fundamental rule is it will depend on the extent to which the reason was embedded into the law or not.
It seems like we're allowing the rabbis in the Gemara to kind of make, with the one that you said that the reasoning doesn't define the law.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like we're allowing them to make like chokim.
So you're right. It's not chukim. It's not complete statutes. There's never an extreme of either. There's always something in between the two, and that's why we study the reasoning behind the law. But we don't always assume we know the full reasoning behind the law. Like even if you read all the parliamentary deliberations, there may have been assumptions that were obvious to people in those days that are just not obvious to us nowadays.
And they don't have the responsibility to like write those.
They have the responsibility to give us the primary reason, but not necessarily every aspect of every single reason. And again, for a simple reason, that even just in terms of spiritual sensitivity, certain things may have been more obvious to them. I'll give you an example. In the laws of Shabbat, you'll often see what appears to be very tenuous laws. You can't ride a horse because you might snap a twig off a tree. You can't go swimming because you might squeeze things out. You can't play musical instruments, you might repair them. We think, nowadays that's so tenuous. It was tenuous back then too. So there's different. I remember seeing somewhere, and Rav Berkowitz spoke about that his Rebbe told him that it's very likely that what the rabbis are doing is there's certain activities they don't want people to do on Shabbat. Shabbat is not a holiday. These are all holiday activities, horse riding, swimming, playing music. They want you to understand that Shabbat is about channeling our energies into the relationship with God, people, with humans and God. That's what it is, right? So they kind of ban now. But they will not legislate a prohibition on Shabbat that's not linked to potential risks. Even though the risk factors are quite low, that's the mechanism they're going to use to do it. So the mechanism is 100% the mechanism. The motivation might be a deeper, broader picture motivation that you've got to pick up by, and that's part of why we try to study hashkafa, sometimes like what else is motivating. But the reason is a real reason. Because you can't just prohibit something on Shabbos. There has to be some proximity. Normally we'd take that risk. We'd say ride a horse. All things being equal, we'd take lots of risks on Shabbos, things that could lead to malacha. Here we won't take the risk. But, yeah. So that's just an example of. So it's not as simple as we can, and much more than that. There's a technical problem. The Talmud has a status, we treat it equivalent to a Sanhedrin, because it was an assembly of all the Jewish leading scholars. And since then, we've never really had such a thing. Certainly not since the end of the Gaonic, but not for the last 1,000 years. And therefore, we have no authority to repeal what goes on, because every time a Sanhedrin ruled, even if it made a decree, another Sanhedrin in the future has to repeal it officially and has to consider itself greater in a few different ways to be able to do so. That's the criteria by which it is.
That's why I asked this one in specific, because it seems like it's actual threat now.
Right. So you're right. That particular one has a particular trajectory to it. And that's why I told you lots and lots of the leading rabbis of the world have said that one should find a way to fulfill it in a way that couldn't bring any health risk. And that, I think, that's... Okay. Now we are out of time.